there, welcome to All Things Savannah, our little deep dive into the stories, history, and people about Savannah, the things that make Savannah so super. Today we have a great guest, CT Nguyen. I hope I've said that right.
Yeah, no,
Who
it's great.
is an interior designer here in Savannah. He has got a story that we're desperate to talk about, and we're gonna get us started with a couple of facts about CT.
So, CT is the founding principal of STUDIO-THO. CT leads a multidisciplinary commercial interior design practice which focuses on the hospitality, repositioning, housing, and workplace sectors. We're going to try to break those all down and get deeper into those and tell you what they mean and what his perspectives are on each of those. So,
Yeah.
welcome to All Things
Welcome.
Savannah.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great you could be here.
Yeah.
So, CT, tell us about you. We like to
Sure.
go back to the beginning
Of
for
course.
a lot of our stories.
Yeah.
Where did you come from? Where are you from? Where were you born?
Well, I was born and raised in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam to diplomatic parents. So from a young age, I get to travel a lot and, learn from a lot of different cultures. I also grew up in a bilingual program, French and Vietnamese. So I kind of speak both languages, but not English. So I came to the States because my mother was working at the Vietnam Embassy in DC. That was her kind of latest post. And I came here with my brother and my mother. And then we ended up staying. We came here, stayed here in school, got my degree in architecture actually, both undergrad and grad. And then I ended up working up in the Boston area. And then a university called me up and said, "Hey, want to come down and lead this kind of new but old program for them?" And I said, "Sure, why not?" And here we are.
How all good things happen.
Yes.
Sure, why not? Say yes.
Say
Say
yes.
You have all sorts of theories and you put them into practice. And there's a few techniques and items that we're going to talk about today
Sure.
that are important to what you do every day. Before we got into the actual recording of the program, we were talking about preservation design, for instance. Can you explain to the folks watching what that is and how that's a part of what you do?
Sure. And I think that we at the firm at Studio-THO, we actually even transform that thinking a bit further and think of it as repositioning, not only preservation, because I think that preservation is usually linked with historic preservation. And I was a professor here, and I'm still a part-time professor with the school, where we teach preservation design, which is a different, in a way, field than historic preservation, where historic preservation focus more on conservation and restoration. Preservation design really think about what's next. How do we evolve architecture? How do we evolve building? And we don't focus on kind of glorifying history in a way. It's not all about history, it's about how do we bring that history and how do we propel that history forward. And I think that that's the key aspect of it. And so in our practice at the firm, we do repositioning and we look at it even in a bit even more progressive of a method where we're really looking at it for what it truly is. It's a piece of real estate. It's a piece of land. It's a piece of architecture. And preservation to us is about keeping the roof on the building, right? So it's ultimately about the economics of it all. So how do we make sure that we tell the right story, and then how do we make sure that we reposition this somewhat depressed asset, usually for preservation projects, into something that is a contributing asset to the community, to the vibrancy of the city, of the town, of the neighborhood, of everybody who's going to enjoy it going forward.
So I think preservation and progress are words that need to come closer together.
Yeah.
And there are many ways of doing that. And we've talked to preservationists here on the show. We've talked to urban planners here on the show. and everyone has a slightly different take.
Mhm.
But I think the common ground is something we all are looking to find.
Mhm.
And the more we talk about it, and the more we see it in practice,
Mhm.
and the more we see it in design too, I think
Right.
is key. So when we see successful examples
Mhm.
of historic spaces being used in progressive ways that we can utilize and enjoy,
Right.
are encouraging.
Mhm.
And that's important for any community, but that we see that so clearly here in Savannah.
Right.
Can they exist in harmony? Can those two things exist in harmony? Can we have respect for historical structures, understand their meaning to the community, and still have them go forward progressively? Can they coexist together comfortably, do you think?
In my humble opinion, that's the only way that they can exist. And I think that, history will remain history without progress, right? I think that it needs to have that push of thinking way beyond what is bound by history to be able to make sure that that piece of history will be relevant for future generations, because there's something beautiful about going and observe and experience from behind a fence, but there's something much more powerful when you actually get to experience from within the space, use the space, touch the history. I think that's so much more powerful, especially in the world where everything is increasingly digital. I think that our next generation would really appreciate to be able to live in history rather than just see history from afar.
I love that. I love that
Yeah.
idea. So you're not just involved though with historic spaces. You're involved with creating new spaces as well. So tell us about some of the projects you're working on now, and some of the things that are in Savannah that we'll see that have your company's touch.
Sure. I think that if you visited our Instagram at STUDIO-THO,
Which we will have linked in the bottom.
thank you. You see the vibrancy of our work. I think that there's such joy in spaces, and I think that in the classroom when I teach, I remind my students all the time that as a designer, your job is not to pick paint and finishes and carpets and curtains, but it's really about bringing joy and emotion into an inanimate space, right? Without you, there's no life in that space. It remains as walls and floors and ceilings. So joy is a key part of it, and to go in and see some of the reaction of the people, reaction of the guests. Doki Doki is one of our project that we were involved in, as well as the latest one, which is the Fitzroy refresh on the rooftop. I think in either space, when you come in, Yukio was one before that as well, and Peregrine at the Perry Lane. All of it has a sense of wonderment. There's a story to be told. There's hidden treasures throughout the space that people come back to engage and to find. I think that all of those are really interesting things. We always aim to make sure that a guest will continue to be surprised and delight every time they come back to our space. So there's a lot of details that we'll put in so that we make sure that there's little hidden things that guests will find.
Well, I can attest to that because I was just at Peregrine, and Peregrine's always been a favorite rooftop bar of mine here in
Beautiful place.
Savannah.
Yeah.
But after your refresh, the first thing I noticed was the yellow flowers in the planters. They had never had flowers in their planters before, and it was joyful.
Yeah.
I just was like, oh, yeah, it just felt like a spark of joy, that doki doki, right? That
Right.
That heartbeat
Yes.
speeding
Right,
up.
that's
Yes.
right.
And I absolutely loved that. And I think when people take a look at your Instagram and a look at your website and start to follow you, they'll see that joy that I think
Thank
is
you.
really a hallmark of your work.
It almost seems like a big picture, little picture thing,
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that the big picture matters, obviously, as you said, the space matters,
Right.
but how you treat that space, right down to the finest detail, also matters. Would that be correct?
We always look at it as perspectives. So, this I think this is coming from kind of what's in my blood. Growing up, in the theater because my dad used to run a cultural institution that exchanged culture with France between France and Vietnam, and so they have a small theater company that now becomes a really kind of big. Theater company in Ho Chi Minh City that put on a lot of plays. So a lot of our summers was spent in the tech booth. Like I was like sneaking into the tech booth and I
where the fun
watch I watch how the directors put on a show, right? And tell stories. And kind of you see it from the rehearsal all the way to the finished kind of play, and you see how the vision come to life. And it's always about telling stories at life to me is a series of stills in a way. It's a series of vignettes. So I kind of see it that way, and I see design that way. You come in and you have a grand view, right? Then you start to go into a close-up, then you get out into a vignette, then you... So life is constantly this idea of changing perspectives. You go from the wow moment as you enter a space and you see the grand view. That's like when the stage got lit up for the first time, right? You're just absorbing everything that's up there. Then spotlight's gonna start to come on to highlight certain key parts of that to create these vignettes. So that's kind of like how we design on the way. So it's really about how do you guide the attention of the guests going from the front door all the way through to even the restrooms, you know? So it's really about that idea of how do you start to unfold a space in a very kind of dramatic and theatrical way. And that's how we always approach every design. It's that kind of storytelling and changing perspectives for us.
Love that, love that. I just want to stop for a second and remind you, if you're just tuning in, that we are All Things Savannah, and we are coming to you from the Twin Space Lounge at the Bluff Hotel in downtown Savannah, 630 West Bay Street. We've got CT with us from the design company THO?
STUDIO-THO, yeah.
And STUDIO-THO. And we've just been talking about some fascinating things. I love what you just said there about storytelling and the drama. As a child in the theater, I mean, literally in the theater, what did you also notice about color and lighting? Because those are integral parts of the stage.
Yeah, and I think that it's really important because, as we all know, in film, in theater, in that kind of media, color has multiple layers of meanings. So we always look at colors in kind of that same way of how there's color theories that, you know, certain colors will induce appetite, you know, so when we design certain type of space, we would kind of use that kind of colors. There's different ways that we start to think about how colors affect everything. But ultimately, I think that people this is my personal opinion, I think that there's a misconception of timeless equal neutral, right? And to me, I think that timeless is kind of, I even said it to my students, like, that's one of the word that I hate the most. I don't like my design to be timeless. I think that I want my guests to be in the moment. I don't want it to design for an extended period of time that, you know, will just be forever. I want them to be there, escape the reality, and be really much in the moment in that time. So the vibrancy of the color, the kind of boldness of the design is what they don't have at home. I also don't agree at the fact that because we design a lot of hospitality space, hotels, resorts, and spaces that are not your home, I don't agree with the idea that your hotels have to feel like you arrive at home, because then why? Why would you go to a hotel?
It's an excellent point.
So
no reason to travel if you're feeling at home.
So ultimately, it's something that you don't have at home. It's something that you are maybe is too afraid. It's too permanent at your home, versus going to a restaurant, going to a hotel. It's a chance for you to almost like going to a play, to escape for that period of time that you are there, and then ultimately experiment. And then we always strive to be something that potentially a guest can take home with them as they experience the space. They can then be like, oh, I never thought that, you know, yellow and purple can go together. But oh, look, they do it here, so maybe I can try that.
So
you
you're
know?
opening them up to new
Yeah, I think
experiences
that
when
it's
it comes
always
to
kind
this.
of a fun thing to try and experiment, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and but ultimately the goal is always to create something that has not been seen. It's something that is always exciting, that will attract the guests to come back.
Are there projects you would rather not take? Not that I want you to necessarily advertise that, but for instance, if it works in a hospitality setting, if it works in a restaurant, it might not work in an office, for instance. Do you not generally do offices, or would you take on an office project that needed to be repositioned?
Funny you asked, because when I was working in Boston, that was my entire role. My role at the firm that I was working with before I came down to Savannah was to bring hospitality to all other aspects of design. So I was working on corporate headquarters a lot. I was working on luxury boxes for stadiums. I was working on senior housing. I was working on multifamily. But ultimately, hospitality, if you think about it, and this actually I learned from my grandmother. I grew up in a multi-generational home where we lived with both grandparents and with my parents, with my brother. It was a lovely, lovely place. And my grandmother always told me that hospitality is about hosting people at the end of the day. It's about anticipating what the guest needs before they needs it. So to me, that's what design is about. Design is to make your life easier, right? So if I would approach a workplace design, an office, a corporate headquarters, I would want to make sure that if you come for an interview, we all know that we get nervous and want to go to the bathroom before we go into the interview. I want to make sure that I place the restroom close to where the lounge is, where the candidates are waiting. I want to make sure that the height of the sofa is high enough that ladies in pencil skirts, won't feel like they have to kind of get up and down quite hardly, or if you have to stand up quickly to shake somebody's hands. All of those things are really small details, but that's what hospitality brings into the workplace, right? So it's not about how many people, head counts we can cram into this floor, but it's about how do you make the space that the employees will be proud to bring their family in and to show off, and the candidates will remember when they interview 10 employers, that day. So what would make them remember that this is X office versus Y office, right? So to me, that's what hospitality is about. So it's this idea of creating this extremely thought out and thorough experience for the guests, regardless of the type of project. So to me, I think that that's always the fun challenge. The fun challenge is about how do we bring these kind of things that only exist in certain sectors into other sectors.
That's very clever. I just think that I've never heard it quite described that way. I just
Right.
think that is it gives you a whole new outlook on interior spaces and what the possibilities, I guess, are.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you think about it, like interior design is, and I keep saying it over and over, and to my students as well, but it's not just about finishes and colors. It's about every decision that you feel like you made in a space was designed for you by an interior designer. Whether you come in and you turn left or turn right, that's already decided for you by the way that the lighting is placed, by design of having a piece of art anchoring that particular view versus that particular view. All of that is about designing for the choreography of the movement in the space. So that's very much about what interior design is to me.
Yes, I've actually thought about interior design is almost humanitarian work, really,
Yes,
because
way
it
of putting it.
so affects the people in that environment. And I want to take some of your classes. What are you teaching right now?
You have a convert or
Because
a new one.
this is philosophy. I mean, this is design philosophy, and I think that's really important for people
Quite
to
deep.
understand
Yeah.
that it's not just HGTV we're talking about, right? And the space can be colorful and fun, but that's just the fragile shell of the exterior. There is so much more going on.
Yeah.
Mhm. And I mean, all of the aesthetic is a big part of it as well. You know, the aesthetic inform how people will react in the space. You know, those are all very deliberate decisions that has been made of where to place certain colors, where to place certain piece of art, where to place, you know, certain accents throughout the space. All of that has been designed to maximize the performance of the space.
You have done some large projects, according to your bio.
Mhm.
They involve historic buildings in places like Pittsburgh and
Mhm.
Miami Beach, I think was another one. The
Palm
Elephant,
Beach.
Palm Beach,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, the Elephant Hotel Palm Beach. You're talking in some cases to people who may not be as creative as you. They are numbers people in many cases. How much convincing do you have to do to get people to see your vision of things?
So, you know, preservation, I understand there's rules and there's regulations that are put in place to ensure that, you know, the property is well preserved, is well protected for future generation, and I truly respect that. Now, however, what I don't want to happen in terms of preservation is that it's becoming a design by checklist or a design by rule. So meaning like color by numbers kind of thing. You know, like you can only use these historic colors. You can only use marble. You can only use these particular things. So to me, I always told, you know, my students and our team at the firm is we know the rules, but we are creative designers. We're not just executor, we're designers. So what that means is that we know the rules. How can we creatively give what they want, but in our own way? So really get understanding. Okay, they tell us that we need to use marble. What does that mean? That means that maybe they need that to be something that is grand, or is it because of a sound quality that we want to achieve, or is it something that they want to protect the existing marble that is there, things like that. So then we can start to think about, okay, so if we, let's say, want to put, like, for instance, the Pittsburgh project, the Union Trust, they have all marble on the ground floor and terracotta tiles, beautifully done, but it's very, very loud in there. It becomes a very echoey chamber, and it's not inviting for guests to stay. So they have a lot of issue. Any restaurants would come in there, any lounge, any bar would come in there. People don't want to stay because it's just not a comfortable place to stay. So we said, you know, we can keep the marble. How can we make this space warmer without discarding the marble? So we propose rugs and carpets. So, and for the rugs, we ended up creating a custom handmade 100% wool rug that is so large and so heavy that it sits on the marble, because the marble cannot be scored, because we have to protect it. And for carpet and rugs to stay on the marble, you have to score the marble to get enough roughness so that the adhesive can adhere, and we can't do that. So we can't use, you know, your kind of lay down tiles and stuff like that. We need to make sure that it's heavy enough that it sits.
It just won't move.
Exactly.
Right, yeah.
It's too heavy to move.
Yeah, it's too heavy to
Exactly.
move, right.
So that's kind of a way that we can give them what they need, which is protecting the marble. So the rule isn't that you have to use marble. The rule is that protect the marble,
Yeah.
right? So then how can we protect the marble, but then also give the warmth that we need for the space to function? So it's always about know the rules, but truly knows what's the intention of the rule is, and then how can we creatively give a solution that will fit both. And I think that's the magic of preservation. It's not
Yes.
just about, you know, determining like we have to use this particular molding profile versus that molding profile. It's really about how do you ultimately give all of that harmoniously.
Flexibility.
We are here at the Bluff Hotel in downtown Savannah. We're All Things Savannah. And we've got CT with us from STUDIO-THO. And we're going to wrap things up here by asking you about your thoughts on Savannah.
Mm.
So, what do you think? This is not where you were born. You are, like many of us,
Yeah.
transplanted. Savannah has a lot of different things going on. What do
Yeah.
you think about it? What do you like?
How long
what,
have you been here? And
So I moved to Savannah right in the middle of the pandemic,
not
2020.
too long ago.
Yes, from Boston, which is at that time was the epicenter, was one of the hotspots. So I was in full hazmat gear on the plane, and I came down here, and everybody's much more lax down here. So I was kind of like
You noticed that, huh?
so I was very the weird one in the airport with the full hazmat suit. But I quickly find out of how resilient this town is, and how adaptable this town is, and how exciting this town is. I think that Savannah to me is kind of this perfect mix of deep history, but also this kind of rebellious rock star kind of vibe, that I think
that.
is
Uh-huh.
is very much, thanks to the young population and the creative population that the university brings here. It's very much a kind of place where, to me, with the right people, anything goes. I think that there's this deep sense of, and I'm fortunate to be working with some great clients that really is always about how can we put Savannah on the map globally, nationally. So not just thinking about, how can we design for a quaint old town, but how do we put Savannah on the map? And Savannah has always, been as that kind of the hostess city, right? It's about hospitality. It's about the kind of charm of known town. But then, if you go into some of these new venues, or even if you go to places like Shop Scat Story, like all of that, there's a jolt of energy and joy that I think exude from all of those places. There's such a big art scene, a big food scene, a big fashion scene that is here, that I think is really exciting. I think that this is that kind of perfect mix of. I think that to me, interestingly, large cities like, let's say, Boston, actually is a little bit more conservative, in my opinion. I think that they are very set in, this is a certain kind of way that they work. They are so owned that they are very much this way. Versus here, there's a bit of still under the radar, that truly there's opportunities that you can really go anywhere. I think that there's the excitement of that. There's also the excitement of this is interesting, but what I've noticed is, the Northeast kind of point of view and aesthetic is very much like, I don't want to show off. I don't want people to know that, I invest in nice things, or do this kind of thing. They're very much this kind of conservative point of view. New York is very much like, oh, let's show everything. Let's just, go crazy. And then
Right.
here, there's a sense of like, let's explore. I'm not afraid of doing crazy things, but there's still, very strict rules because we are a full historic district. So there's kind of that really creative way of, and I said rebellious rock stars because you start to see kind of like these guerrilla kind of tentacle that kind of comes out that, embellish the cities and give it a sense of wonder that I think is very different than any other cities I've lived in. So that's the exciting part.
Wow, that is a great description. I just think you have a great way of explaining your vision and how you interpret things, and I think you're right on the money. I think, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, thank you so much for being
course.
with us,
So
CT.
glad you spent time.
This has
Yeah.
been terrific, and yeah.
Well, we will thank our fabulous tech team one more time because they are so good and they have us, with fantastic sound. So we thank Maria Oliver and Riley Sandifer and Talia Bonilla. Today's show sponsored by Media MO and Historic Solutions Consulting. Another deep dive coming up soon into the people and the places and the history of the hostess city, Savannah, Georgia. We hope you join us on All Things Savannah.
Thanks for watching.